This is the last session of the day, but I'm hoping all of you have good amount of energy still left in you, because I'm hoping to make this a more participative panel, just like the Swachh Bharat mission should be. It needs involvement from each and every one of us, and that's the idea. Also, I think, and I'm going to be a little biased here, but I genuinely believe this is the best session of the day. It is going to be the best session of the day. We have a power-packed panel and these are all inspiring, powerful women who are going to tell us how to bring about a revolution and how they're already doing it in their own ways already. So, in no connection to what I just said about inspiring power-packed panel, let me introduce myself again. I am Tanvi Shukla. I'm the news editor with Mirror Now. It's a channel that in its own way also is trying to bring about a change in the way news is done. And we are trying to revolutionize that space by speaking more about people issues. And I think this is one of those issues that we must speak more about. So let me bring on our panelists now, beginning with Ms. Nainalal Kidwai. She obviously doesn't need much introduction, especially here at FICCI. She's also the chair for the Indian Sanitation Coalition. And I'm glad you were able to stay back for this, Ms. Kidwai. We also have with us Ms. Cheryl Hicks. She's the director and CEO at the Toilet Board Coalition. She's going to be talking a lot more about women entrepreneurship, and she'll hopefully be telling us a few inspiring stories about women in this sector and the stuff that they're doing. I've also got Ms. Madhu Krishna, India Country Head for WASH with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Ms. Priyanka Dutt, she's the Country Director, India for BBC Media Action, and she's going to be telling us a bit more about how to get the word out, how to get more people interested and communicate this better. Ms. Vedika Bhandarkar, Managing Director for India at water.org. We'll get a better sense of how them and more organizations like them are financing and helping people really improve the sanitation and water accessibility and clean water in their life. And I've also got Ms. Kaku Nakate, President and Country Head for Bank of America. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. So I just landed this afternoon from Mumbai, and I had put together some thoughts about this interesting session, but then I dropped my phone just about an hour ago, and there goes the Digital India plan. I've lost my notes. I have put together in the past 20 minutes some basic notes hurriedly into this notepad now. So pardon me as I shuffle and look for those pointers that I wanted to address. But obviously, women and sanitation for women is not just health, hygiene, and sanitation. It's a lot more about dignity for them. It's about their right to privacy. It's about safety for women, and we will touch upon some of those aspects. If they have access to toilets and functional clean toilets, it also brings about a larger factor of safety. And again, it's about empowering these women. And I feel that if women themselves can become a part of bringing about this change, then that is when this is going to be a revolution, when we start leading this change. I have two stories that when I was researching, I came across, and I wanted to just tell you about them. There's a lady called Kuwar Bai. She's 105 years old, in Chhattisgarh. And for most of her life, she obviously didn't have access to any kind of toilets or sanitation facilities. Until just a few years ago, she found out of what it can do for you and how it can improve your life. She sold her goats, whatever she owned, to get the money to build first a toilet for herself. And she was so inspired and so convinced with what this can do that she actually ensured that her entire village, becomes open defecation free. And that's what she's done in Chhattisgarh. She's 105 years old. There's another girl, she's 11 years old, in Jamshedpur, who saved her from her pocket money for about a year to build a toilet for herself and her family. She's also become quite a bit of a hero and an inspiration where she lives and amongst people that know her. So these are two stories, but let's talk more about how women can bring about the change that they need and the country itself needs. And Ms. Kadwai, I want to come to you first. How far along are we with when it comes to sanitation and health hygiene in India?
Well, Tanvi, we've heard a lot this morning on that journey, and like with most things, there's much cause for celebration, but there's no standing still. And I thought you might actually ask me as to the role that women can play going ahead in this. And that brings me to a favorite quote of mine by George Bernard Shaw, who said, "The true challenge of men, the true test of men, is what they do at times of challenge and times of change." I think the important thing to recognize here is that women always knew it. So here we are as women at a point of change, at a point of challenge, and here only because we have a very creative team at the India Sanitation Coalition who decided that they just wanted to have women up on the panel. So in case you think there's any deep thought behind this one, it's just that. So here we are to really come across to address two very important issues, the issues you've already raised, Tanvi, which is how women are the most impacted by things in sanitation. But having said that, for many of us who've worked with the cause of sanitation, we've also fought back to make it a women's only issue, because the whole program that started off in sanitation was directed to women, as if it was absolutely fine for men to go and defecate in the open, because it's not. To be open defecation free, it's a problem for a village to tackle, it's a problem for a district to tackle, and it's a problem for all of us to embrace. Yes, women are the worst sufferers, whether it is water, whether it is sanitation. If you don't provide water and sanitation, it is the women and the girls of the family who stay back. They're the ones who are spending energy and time doing all the things that they need not have to do if the provision is at their doorstep, let alone the disease and the security and all the issues you've named. But I think what I would really like to see, and it's always great to see a diverse audience like this. Most of my career and Kaku's career and Vedika's career, we have not seen audiences that are as mixed as this. It tells me that there are many women here for sanitation. And what I would like to laud today is every one of the women on this table for all that they have done and are doing in the cause of sanitation. So on that note, I'm going to head back to you.
Okay. And I'm sure everybody here knows a lot more about this than I know, but I just wanted to point out a few statistics because I think these statistics always stand out and need to be spoken about just to remind us how important this entire issue is. Women who don't have access to toilets in their homes and have to go out for it are twice as likely to be raped or sexually assaulted, and which is why it becomes a lot more imperative. 25% of girls, and this is data as per 2015 government report, drop out of school the minute they get their menstrual periods because hygiene is an issue. Most of the schools that they go to don't have functional toilets, and so it becomes impossible for them. So let's begin by focusing about why it is very essential to bring it in for women, and also then tell stories about how women are actually doing it for the entire country. Madhu, do you want to just give us some insights into how are we bringing about the change when it comes to lack of toilets, lack of functional toilets, and then making them sustainable?
So, thanks. I want to actually reiterate what Nana said, because we did a lot of research into why households don't use toilets, especially for urban areas. And one thing came starkly out, that women will use toilets to the point that they're dysfunctional and will consistently use toilets. Men don't use toilets, and men are very reluctant to use toilets. And this comes from both rural and urban. So the whole attention, actually, of the previous advertising, taking on this women's dignity and safety, which I completely support the intention, but the unintended consequence was that message went out that was perfectly dignified for a man to go out and openly defecate or urinate. But for a women, it was actually very undignified. And then, of course, women have a much higher sense of self and dignity that we all know. So, unfortunately, the messaging had to be changed, and I'm very happy to report that both the ministries, if you see all of the campaign, actually now targets men, because that's really the group that needs to be convinced. Unfortunately, they still hold a lot of influence over purchasing power within a household. So again, from that perspective as well, they needed to be convinced. Another one that I think stands out on gender stereotyping, and you did quote the statistic, but it's also bad to say that women can only be safe if they're cloistered inside the house.
Sure.
Are we saying that if you go out, then you should be raped and killed, and therefore you should stay inside a toilet? That's not the right reason. The reason is they need it for their safety. And the third thing that I see often is that in urban areas, they'll say, okay, we built community toilets and there are self-help groups of women, so it's their job to also maintain that, right? So that just puts a huge, extraordinary burden on women. And actually in rural areas, as we know, getting the water is often the job of the woman by default. And so to some extent, you're saying, now you have a toilet, now you also now provision for all of the water, extra water that the household needs. So our messaging needs to stop saying women's dignity and women's safety. It is household dignity, household safety. Having a clean house toilet is everyone's responsibility. So let's really shout out to that for the women, because you should not,
Yes.
with all the best intentions, add a burden on them. That's one. I think the second thing that is, there's a huge opportunity in sanitation. We've been talking about it, and I think this is the right audience, about entrepreneurship. And we need to make sure that we ensure women's agency in it, because they understand the value to society. So absolutely, you should talk to women first. I went to a self-help group in Andhra Pradesh, and the women stood up when a lot of men were talking to them, and they actually stood up and said, can we please interrupt? Why are you trying to convince us about the use of toilets? We know it. Please convince the men who are more interested in buying TVs and motorcycles but not buying toilets. So definitely we need to take the messaging away from women, but recognize that they have a huge agency, a much higher social consciousness, and therefore should be encouraged to actually become entrepreneurs in this and increase their agency, rather than say that they need to be somehow provided for. Actually, they are the ones who are providing for everything in a family. So that's our sort of take on this.
Well, maybe it's more about some of the limited opinion urban view that said that, well, if you get to convince the woman, then she's going to ensure that the entire household follows it because she's the boss of the house. So maybe that's where it stemmed out from. But Priyanka Dutt, would you want to weigh in on whether we need to change the way we are communicating this to the country?
I mean, I think what Madhu's just said tells you exactly what the story is. For too long, the communication around sanitation has done damage to a gender agenda. And I think it's very important to remember that sanitation isn't isolated, and the sanitation work that we all do isn't hived off from the rest of life. And it's really, really critical for us to remember that when we're talking about achieving sanitation outcomes, we can't do that at the cost of other things. So it's really important, for instance, for us to think about not highlighting anything as exceptional, but really looking at how do we use communication to normalize. How do we normalize sanitation behavior? How do we normalize a certain way of being? How do we role model it, but without making it exceptional, without making it something that is different, is other, is unusual, and therefore cannot be accessed by everybody who lives in this country. So it really needs to be something that becomes completely accepted, completely normal, completely part of our everyday lives. And I think one way of doing that is to really think about how do we address issues that are linked to, for instance, the drudgery of women that has been referred to already. And one of the ways that we've tried to do this, we haven't evaluated it yet, so we're not sure if it works as yet, but is to really look at myths and misconceptions that exist around sanitation and how that might actually impact the lives and the decisions that are taken at a family level that impact the role of women. So for example, can we do something around communicating about how much water is actually needed for a toilet or for a household for a day that will then help make those decisions differently? So approach it from a very different point of view. Approach it from a much more sort of technical, if you like, point of view, rather than from a, this is about the safety and dignity of women. And I think it's really sort of important for all of us who work in the media, who work with communication, to remember that we have a responsibility, that every single word, every single frame, every single image carries weight. And we've got to be really careful about how we shape the conversation to make sure that we're not damaging women's roles at a much larger level at the cost of sanitation outcomes.
All right. Well, the other aspect is obviously about who gives you the money to build this. Even now, I think, 53% of households have toilets and the rest don't. Most of that is in the rural areas, but I don't think urban areas are completely open defecation free either. Where do you get the money from? Is it going to be the individual, each citizen? Where do they get it from? Can they really afford it? And if they can't, how do you convince them that this is something that they must look into and invest or find the money? How much of a role does a government have to play in that? And it's interesting that we are having this conversation today. There's been a bit of a controversy with the ruling party tweeting out some data about the funds that have been used in building toilets during UPA's era and BJP's era, NDA's era, and there is a lot of controversy over it because the numbers don't add up. So I'm wondering if any of you can give us a sense of how much does it cost and who's really funding it for us right now.
Okay, so I'm not going to get into the controversy at all,
Yeah.
right? But, it's our belief that one of the main reasons, probably not the only reason, but one of the main reasons why people living at the base of the economic pyramid do not have the solutions which they need, whether it's for water or for sanitation, is lack of financing, lack of affordable financing and lack of capital upfront. And I think the point was made by all three panelists before me, the cost which the people at the base of the economic pyramid pay for when they do not have access to proper water or sanitation is very high. It's much higher than what you and I would pay, right? And the cost is high in terms of, it could just be the actual cost. So if you're living in an urban slum and you're paying for tankers for water, and it could also be the coping cost, right? So the coping cost in terms of the number of hours spent per day, in terms of illnesses, in terms of girls dropping out of school, all of that. And so we looked at the problem from a different end, and we said, if we can help solve the financing issue, then the communities, more often than not, know what they need, and they know how to get it, but it's just catalyzing that, right? And so we started working with financial partners, and the financial partners who we work with, the microfinance, the self-help groups, the banks, small finance banks, State Rural Livelihood Mission, they all have women as their clients. And so what's interesting is we didn't start about it this way, but 98% of the clients of our partners in India are women. And so and that's how they're financing it. And to answer your question in terms of how much does it cost, I think 12,000 rupees, which the government gives as an incentive, we found that more often than not, it's not adequate. And which is fine because it's not supposed to cover 100% of the cost, and which is why we do find that families borrow to build their toilets, because then it becomes, several cases, it becomes an aspirational product. So there's toilet, there's a bathing facility, and I absolutely agree water is needed, otherwise it doesn't solve the equation.
Yes, so apart from just the setting up part of it, where you can, where I do see that there are a lot of organizations who are now, funding it. But Ms. Nakate, what about sustainability? What about the cost that's needed to ensure that the toilets are operational when they are built, to ensure that waste disposal happens in a proper way?
So, one of the things before we go on, I wanted to add to Vedika that when we actually at Bank of America decided to fund Swachh Bharat the first year, we realized there was no backdrop that we could say that the money was used in the right purpose. That's when we decided, like a normal investment banker would, there has to be research behind where you're putting your mouth is, and how do you kind of start looking at creating the impact to measure. And we did a research report with Dasara across India, and then we came up with a number that the loss of jobs. So, to look at women in a slightly different fashion, not just for safety, but the number of productive hours, that itself costs around $10 billion, if you may say, from this, you could add to the GDP, which is a very meaningful number. And then we further went on and we said that, if we have to do this as a joint effort and kind of also, help our other MNC corporates to actually look at it, we went on further to really look down to the different NGOs. And we shortlisted 8, like a normal banker would. And we had everyone which was very different, a legal guy, a compliance guy, and then, investment banker. It was a very good exercise with research, and we ended up with 8. To your point, the point then came is, how do we put because we had to put our money where our mouth is. So we wanted to really shortlist 4. And one of the biggest debates was the capacity enhancement and the sustainability as to who really has the talent or who can be groomed into that talent to be able to grow. That, it's a 3-year or a 5-year horizon. And, with that, you not only make the NGO stronger with your funding, but also work with them to really get. I'm happy to say that a couple of them are here with us today. And, it has been a very wonderful journey. And as we debate this further, it's not just about giving a grant, but it's kind of sitting down and kind of seeing, can we help them with HR? Can we help them, narrow down on the CFO? These are the big problems that we realized from a sustainability, which is important, because people who give funds, and if you're going to attract global funds, they are going to ask, where is the money spent? And the people whom you're recruiting are obviously, the efficiency level takes time to build. So you need to build all of this and work through the journey. And I have found that, people are willing to learn. And the other thing, it was a big learning for us too, because we realized in different states have different models. And somewhere, you're getting the 12,000 as Vedika mentioned. Somewhere you're not getting the 12,000, you're getting only 4,000. And, then there is somewhere that there is just the little lower middle income class, which actually needs toilets too, but they are not available because they don't fit into the criteria which the government has done. And as a result, then we realize that it's better to influence people who are willing to change, who are willing to differentiate. And as a result, today we've done around 10,000 toilets across India, and each one has got a different learning. So with one of the NGOs, Pratima is here, she actually gave a model where, you start with actually seeing that the water supply comes. So town planning became important in that model, and that model appealed to us, and then you ended up with doing the households on there. And the other model that we looked at with MHT and Grama in the south was that if you're going into the south, can you create an ecosystem in the village which actually brings in, the things to really build the toilet, but then builds the biodegradable mass, which then gets used to. So, over a period of time, we realized But our single motto was also driven by a global thing, was we wanted to influence women. So I kind of little disagree with them, and not from the point about the notion, but we thought that India has 10% adolescent girls, which is the largest population in the world. We have to solve for that young mass, and that's 120 million people. And that is why our thing has been, we go and fund toilets at households where there is necessarily an adolescent girl. And by doing that, it has been a learning, because men don't like to get a funded toilet at home because of a woman. And that also has improved the dignity of her. And the idea has not been safety, it's also been safety plus nutritional value plus productivity. And that's how we've been seeing it.
Mr. Alex, would you want to weigh in on that front? And like Ms. Vedika was saying, when in their experience, every time they interacted, they realized that it was mostly women who were working in these organizations. Do you have similar experiences?
Yes, thank you. So at the Toilet Board Coalition, we work with large businesses and entrepreneurs and trying to build partnerships for the sanitation economy. And maybe to reflect from that business perspective, women in business, in sanitation, and then on women entrepreneurs. And I'm going back to January this year, and I congratulate the ISC for this panel, because it is the year of the woman, 2018. And that, for me, kicked off this year at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where we were holding a session to engage business and societal leaders in the sanitation economy. And all of the journalists wanted to know about this question of what's happening in terms of women in businesses, in sanitation, related to the Me Too movement. And there's no longer tolerance that women are ill-treated in the workplace. And to be honest, this is not something that we had been looking at before that. And you know, in coming back to our companies and our members, this is an issue that they are looking at and are interested in. And what we found is that, in fact, they, as investors as well, are looking for women entrepreneurs, and there's increasingly an interest in gender lens investing, where women investors are interested in investing in women entrepreneurs. And we're seeing that for a lot of reasons, but I think the reasons that I've been most taken by in participating in different panels and events since then is that the reason is because they're interested in the woman's new view on the world, and what are the business opportunities, and what are the design opportunities in a world designed by women. And if you think of something simple as a toilet, and many of the examples I think have been mentioned, but we all have what our view of the design flaws are with men designing our toilets. But that's but that's similar, you know, in aspects of the economy. And as I said, we look at you know, the toilet economy, the circular waste management economy, as well as the preventative health economies. And if women entrepreneurs are leading businesses, finding new solutions in these areas, then what interesting new business opportunities can we find? And so I think on the opportunity side, that's what we're very interested in. And in doing my homework, as all of you had stats, you know, we went to our members, WaterAid and UNICEF and UN Women, who had stats around 1 in 3 women worldwide without a toilet. The health risk for pregnant women, 44 million pregnant women have sanitation-related health infections due to sanitation. UN Women has found that 95% of people engaged in manual scavenging are women. And so women are at risk because of poor sanitation and because of our current sanitation systems. And in my view, this movement that we have right now around women in business is really encouraging to start to reset that system. From that system design level, if women were designing that system and designing the businesses and economy within it, what would it look like, and what would the new opportunities be for our economy?
Great.
And maybe 2 examples, because you
Yes.
asked for examples. Here in India, I've just actually been earlier this week with one of the companies that we're supporting in our Toilet Accelerator program, where we support entrepreneurs. And this is a business called Toilets for Her in the city of Pune. It is refurbished buses in the city of Pune that have been refurbished to be public toilets for women. And what we're working on together with our members, Unilever, Kimberly-Clark, and Firmenich, particularly on this bus for women, is understanding who is this woman customer. And by the way, this is run by a woman entrepreneur. And who is she as a woman business leader in this context? And so we're really starting from that design thinking point of view, as I was just saying, and how does this service look different when it's serving women and when it's made by women on the one hand. And on the other hand, what they're finding in terms of early insights is that for many women, they think that this bus, because it is outfitted with a place that women want to go, that many women think it's not for them. They think that this bus is too nice for them, and so there's some really interesting insights coming out of that in terms of how to change that mindset and change that behavior that this bus is absolutely for them. And interestingly, this woman entrepreneur has great aspirations to turn this not only into a basic pay-for-service public toilet model, but also have the opportunity for her to breastfeed there, to get information on women's hygiene and health, and eventually potentially a path lab for women to understand risks around pregnancy, et cetera. So this is just one example of how a woman entrepreneur is designing toilets for her in new ways and opening up new market opportunities.
Really interesting and more power, I think, to that lady who's leading that business. Okay, so we're going to open this to questions now as well, because let's make it a little bit more participative. And I'm a news anchor. What we usually do in our debates is either we go on monologues, which I don't think any of you are interested in hearing me out right now, or we intervene when our panelists start yelling at each other and we tell them to calm down. I don't think these ladies are going to be doing that either. But let's make it a little bit more of a free-willing, open conversation. And maybe, Madhu, you want to take forward from here?
So I want to add to what Cheryl said, and it goes back to my point earlier about women's agency. So as I said, we work in urban sanitation, and I have one interesting story to tell. I was sitting in a government meeting. I was the only woman in that meeting, and the men were talking about some public toilets that they had made, both for men and women. Unfortunately, what they were coming back with was saying that actually the women aren't using that toilet at all, that public toilet complex. And the solution that was being asked to be tabled at that point was that, okay, then maybe we should just, women probably don't need it, and let's just have it converted into a men's toilet. And since I was the only woman there, I thought that's a really irrational thought, and I just said, maybe one idea that you could probably think about was maybe ask the women why they're not using it. And it was like an aha moment, and everybody looked at me and said, oh, really? Wow. Oh, yes, actually, maybe we should. And then, the answer was obvious. That toilet was not designed for women. It was very open to the public, and women like a certain amount of privacy. But it was just amazing. As Cheryl said, when men plan something, they obviously don't have that perspective. So one big thing that we are doing is, not only is it going to be the Year of the Woman for the foundation. As you know, Melinda is very passionate about making sure this is an equitable world for all women all over the world, is that we are insisting that our partners work with governments, that we have women's agency at every level of decision making.
I just want to add to that, that's also the state of affairs in our parliament and most of our assemblies. The huge majority of men who are deciding on half the country's population, which is women, with absolutely no idea of what they need. So I think that's a reality in almost every sector we are facing today. Ms. Mandharkar, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add. So as I said, we work with different types of financial institutions and across 17 states. And what we realized, again, with the gender lens, right, is the most successful partners, and some of them are in this room, are the ones who work, because this is a sensitive subject, right? And as you said, there's a privacy issue, there are so many issues. Earlier, we used to have partners who used to have men on the field and go and talk to women clients. That didn't work too well, right? And so what works best now is people, women from the community, really a couple of them getting trained, getting becoming champions to make that change across the rest of the community. Now, it's a very simple thing, right? And it's not, when you hear about it, you say, yeah, obviously. I mean, that's obvious. But it took us time, and that's what has worked across states now. And, people always say, oh, it's easy in the South. Yes, it's easier, but one of our most successful partners is in Uttar Pradesh, and that's what's working with them because they have women from the communities acting as the change agents.
Why is it easy in the South?
That's the belief that it's more educated, more prosperous, and hence easier to change.
All right. We're going to start taking some questions, but Sharon, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in really as a follow-on to what Vedika said, that what we've sort of assumed is the understanding, but I want to reiterate that the world of microfinance has worked best where the self-help groups are groups of women, because it is women that form that community which is then lent to, they stand guarantor for each other, and 99% of those loans which are happening to the poorest sections of society, mostly in rural India, are the loans that are getting repaid. So in any case, the financing model for toilets and some of the work which water.org and Vedika are doing in terms of lending for sanitation, the core of it is women. So it's about addressing women's needs, but it's addressing the household's needs where the woman is the guarantor de facto for the financing. So let's not forget that.
Go ahead, music.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the equity issue because I think it's important, as we've found in talking about women in business, women in sanitation, that men don't feel left out, and that men don't feel that this is an either or, but rather an and. That if we think about the population and more than 50% here underserved, it's really about serving that population. And from a business perspective, that's again 50% and more than 50% of customers that you haven't had or you could have in new ways, and utilizing your products and services better and more people attracted to them. So that's just something that we found important to keep in mind, because it can be a very emotional and alienating debate if we're saying that what we've been doing for so long, it is wrong. We're saying there's an and here because there's a group that we could also be serving better.
But having said that, I just also want to say the communication can be sensitized in ways which work. And one of the most interesting examples I had, what I heard was in Haryana, the district collector there was struggling with the last 10 villages before she could have her district declared open defecation free. And being a smart collector, the messaging was brilliant, because she finally went to the elders in these 10 villages, men, and basically suggested to them that if their villages didn't convert, the women were going to be marrying into the villages which were in fact converted, because the women wanted toilets and they wanted hygiene. So she got her messaging absolutely right to the guys, because the villages converted overnight to becoming open defecation free. So sometimes the communication to guys may have to be about the women too.
Any questions so far? Anything? Go ahead, please, in the front.
Fascinating discussion. I have a question. So there's a lot of discussion around gender that many of our organizations that we work in are navigating. For instance, at Dalberg, this whole thing about what gender is a huge focus area, and we're having lots of coaching and feedback even for the men around unconscious bias, right? And how, because there are genuine blind spots, and we, with the best of intentions, we sort of get things wrong. I wonder now with a forum like ISC, right, and you're trying to orchestrate an entire ecosystem, and there are many stakeholders in, let's say, sanitation in India, in Asia, what kind of capacity building, what kind of reflection, etc., could be done for the sector to guard, to really sort of focus on gender lens investing, gender lens program design, hardware design, and even sort of just guarding against unconscious bias? Something somewhat to your point, Madhu, about when you were the only woman in that room and the way they were sort of subconsciously going about this. What can be done structurally to raise the game for the sector?
So as I said, one of the things that we are insisting, so at least in the urban, you have what we call the city sanitation task forces. And what our partners are doing are insisting that there are a certain amount reserved in that task force for women representation. So at every level, if you can at least start with having a woman's viewpoint so that you don't have these great aha moments, well, oh wow, we should ask women, it becomes natural. So hopefully you take some of that bias away. And again, you know, this is going to the larger question of just women's representation when you're planning infrastructure, when you're planning systems, have that voice and make sure that you have that voice in and that consultation. I think that would help a long way. And although it sounds very basic, we know that doesn't exist. When you see urban planners at municipalities or even at state level, very few women are present in those discussions.
So beyond representation, could it be institutionalized? I mean, could something more concrete be sort of done beyond just representation, which is more which will stand the test of time and the vagaries of.
You should have a checklist. Have you checked with the women in your community when you're planning infrastructure, when you're doing urban sanitation planning? Make sure that you have done this. I think it can be institutionalized. It is being institutionalized, at least in our states.
And in fact, to your point, Neera, so the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation has just come out with a set of gender norms that they want followed for the entire program. And it's a great start. I question whether having a list of we must do this is enough, or whether we need to actually break it down into something that's a lot more operationalizable, if that's a word, but something that's actually easy to understand, easy for people to put into practice, a simple question that you can ask yourself, really sort of marry that checklist, if you like, with the kind of sensitization training that you're talking about. You know, how do you actually develop something that can be used at every level by every single person? And perhaps it's to build on the work that the ministry's already started doing. That's the first step.
If I may add, one thing I wanted to say is that I think state governments should be encouraged to take models that are working. And, you know, there are models, and, you know, if we can help to convey that message, obviously, it'll be easier to replicate and institutionalize and bring down the cost. And the second thing is, I think very many times the toilets are made, but subsequent impact after a year needs to be really created to see really the issue. And that is where we found, at least in the impact analysis we did in the first time of a round of funding, that all was not well, because, you know, some of the fundings or the models needed to be worked. And then when you have 2 or 3 or 4 models working together and exchanging thoughts, better things kind of come out. And to your point on unconscious bias is on both sides. It's not just men, it's men and women. And that's why that interaction amongst all is more important.
Sharon, you wanted to add something?
Sure. Just to pick up on the on that point of structural change. I mean, we found incentives really have gone a long way in promoting entrepreneurship. So already sanitation entrepreneurs for the sanitation economy is already something we've had to create some strong incentives around to attract entrepreneurs into this sector and show them that there's benefits. And I think for women we're seeing the same. And for women we're seeing, as I said before, you know, many banks and many impact investors and family foundations now taking a gender lens investing approach because their clients are asking for that. And those are incentives. You know, it's incentives when you have a couple of co-founders, who's going to be out in front? You know, if there's incentives for to attract investment, it may be the woman, and it may give her sort of new recognition within that firm. So we think that incentives, we've seen some good track record there on incentives really working around making that change.
Just on a more humorous note, for years I would, talking to corporate women, call it the Lou factor, and suggest to women that they assess the women friendliness and diversity sensitiveness of the organization to where the Lou's were in that office or organization they were going to join. Because the organizations I first joined, you would be on a ground floor, the only women's loo was on the 4th floor. And then we graduated to a small little toilet behind the copy machine. And it is today, to my mind, a gauge of where the women's loos are, the quality of the loo, And if you go to factories today, you would still find issues, unlike some of the more urban settings. So the loo factor counts in every situation, in a rural home and even in a corporate office today.
To pick up on another humorous part of that, we've also heard from our companies, what comes first, women in the workforce or the toilet in the workforce, and why are women not joining because there's no toilet, or there's no toilet because women aren't joining?
Anyone else? Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. I don't want to ask any question, but just two quick observations. Having been in the sanitation sector for over 2 decades, and visiting community toilets in urban areas, which are both for men and women. One side is for men and one is for women. Unfortunately, we have seen that they're all controlled by men, because it is presumed that men work, they earn, so they can afford to pay for using a community toilet, whereas women don't earn, they're not bread earners, so they cannot afford, so it's free for the women. And hence, the public toilets are maintained by the men, the supervisors are men, and the people who collect the money are also men, and the women's side is totally neglected. As a result, nobody goes inside to even see whether the women's part of the community toilet is even maintained or not, whether there are any latches at the doors, whether there are any bulbs, whether there's any water, and are there any facilities for MHM. They just open drums lying, which results in a lot of stink over there. And so it is quite unusable, especially in the evenings or late hours of the evening or night, and which we all know results sometimes in very unfortunate incidents in late parts of the night. And besides that, they also close at night. After 9 o'clock, they close the women's side so that nothing happens, mishaps happen. So it's very important that now, with more and more urbanization and more people coming into urban areas, focus should be on the women's side of the community toilets, should be looked into not just by men who are planning it and who are controlling it, basically. They're really controlling it, whichever agency it is. And women are nowhere in that sector at all. So I would like to stress that we must have sanitary napkin vending machines and incinerators, not only there, but also in all schools and colleges where girls are there, and at all public places, because this is something we all need. And when we are talking of sanitation, it's just not toilets, but it's also the feminine hygiene and the menstrual hygiene aspects also, and the disposal through the incinerators of sanitary napkins, which is very, very important, which probably is not being even considered at all. The second point which I would like to mention is that, as we just mentioned, one of our panelists, that majority of scavengers are women. And it's not now, it's been going on for decades, for centuries, that scavengers are treated as untouchables because they're doing this inhuman task of cleaning dry toilets and carrying human excreta on their heads. 95% or majority are women. We have to make sure that this does not percolate to the rural areas, which I just mentioned in the last session, that toilets are being constructed at a very fast pace there, but technology is being ignored totally. Again, septic tanks are being made in all rural houses under the SBMG, and what it's going to lead to, maybe, I dread it in the future, would be again to women scavengers in rural areas where those septic tanks would need to be cleaned if there's no desludging mechanism over there to clean the septic tanks. So these two are points which I feel should be considered for all policy making. Thank you.
Thank you for highlighting both those points, but I just wanted to check with you. Are you saying that the men's loos were actually better off?
Yes, definitely, because they were being maintained.
They were being maintained.
Yeah, because there were men going into it and seeing to it, and because they felt that the men are paying for it, so they need a better service. Whereas the women's side was totally neglected. And that's been all across India. I visited in different cities, different parts of India, and found the situation the same everywhere. Thank you.
Good.
No question, just a comment on what Naina missed out on. This is in talking about 2013.
I don't think Mr. Kidwai should be allowed to speak.
This is in 2013, when CSR was just about being considered. There was a group of us that were together, And we said, hey, there's going to be a lot of money coming in. She, being a banker, realized how much money was going to be coming in. And so like everyone else, said, let's start looking at education, let's start looking at health. During the course of the conversation, someone mentioned, it's such a shame that our girls can't go to school or drop out for lack of toilets. And that was the genesis of the India Sanitation Coalition.
Yes.
I think it's it's the very most important topic about these women entire things, because even UNICEF also did a study in Maharashtra. It has been shown that 99% women in rural areas, more than 99% are using toilet, and children below 12 years and men above 50 years are not using the toilet. But coming back to the issues of the women, that I'm just sharing an example case of in Maharashtra happened. That time Malini Shankar used to be the principal secretary of Water Supply Sanitation Department, and she did a review of the condition of the toilets in the district administration offices. Forget about the beneficiaries and the things. And it was pathetic that not 90% cases, the women toilets and urinals are not functional. Then in one incident in one of the districts, I should not name out the district here, that the executive engineer of particular that district has been garrowed by the women staff of that. He was literally locked inside a room for 12 hours unless he renovate the women toilet. So based on that, Malini Shankar started a program called Nirmal Karyalay. That means that clean administrative buildings and institutions. So somehow Maharashtra, it gained the momentum, but also it depends on the individual leaderships. Once the leadership changed in the government level, also the program. But the situation, the situation and the pathetic conditions are same even in the district offices also. Because what happens is the CEO collectors, they have their own chambers and own toilets. But those are the staffs working in the department. They can't access the CEO and collector toilets and urinals. Yeah. So there's a lot of kind of discrimination also in the government departments also.
Okay, I have a question, and before I take it to the panel, maybe, okay, you go ahead first and then I will.
So yes, I mean, my just quick question is, unlike the women friendliness in the toilet design, can you also talk about the children friendliness in the community toilet as? Because I have very, very rarely seen a community toilet which fits for the children. Even in many institutions as well, in the offices if you go, no urinal fits for the children to use.
In schools, the urinals are too high for the children, and there are no small pots for the children if they want to go in this thing. Now, of course, they're saying that there should be separate toilets for girls and separate for boys, but the design is not considered as it should be.
If I can share, at least in some of the NGOs that we are partnering with for the school toilets, because our idea has been that you should have toilets in schools as well as households, then only it becomes a 24/7 kind of a service. And in that, actually, when they designed the toilets, actually they had, for the children, they'd probably gone in more for an Indian toilet, so that, any kind of age can really use it. But for the seniors, they had, different. So both the toilets were the Indian as well as the Western. But the other thing that we realized based on the study, and that's what we have tried to do over the portfolio, is more than 30% of the funds are used not for building the toilets, but actually to encourage hygiene, washing habits, and the maintenance. And we have tried to take efforts, or the NGOs have tried to take efforts, that even when they're handing over the toilet, that we fund actually programs which actually inducts everyone, and then there is a renewal program 1 year after, and then we have seen that the increase of toilet usage has happened better, and the toilets themselves are maintained in a much better fashion.
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Great. So thank you, first of all, Naina, for organizing this session, because earlier when we were talking about it, I just found it very amazing to see, when I look at the 6 of you, we can actually have the entire spectrum of the solution available right under your leadership. from communication to actually FSM to donors to entrepreneurs to financiers, everybody's right there. And it's a great thing to see it's all there with you. My key concern actually comes is that, and it actually goes closer to Priyanka, we've talked about BUMT in a big way. You know, I know the men have actually not really had a good sense about how they build it, usage. Madhu has talked about this often, how men have actually lagged behind. My concern comes in the maintain side. That's another trap we're getting into. Traditionally, women maintain toilets. Traditionally, women maintain houses. And so they'll be the buyers of the system. And if we do not come in with good BCC and communication thought, we don't jump into that position, we're going back into the same trap once more.
I think you're absolutely right, Manoj. I think it's really important. So historically, I think a lot of us in the communication space came in thinking about behavior change needed to be done around usage, and that was it. But I think it's really, really critical to think about the role of communication across the value chain, and the fact that a lot of people think about maintenance and treatment as well as being something that's very infrastructure-led, very systems-heavy, very government-heavy. But there's absolutely a role for individual people, for households, to play in that entire value chain. And it's critical for communication to play that facilitating role, not just to improve awareness, but actually to shift attitudes, to change the way people think about this, and to normalize certain behaviors and to introduce certain new norms, particularly around maintenance. How that's going to happen and how long it's going to take is not an answer that anybody has right now. But you're absolutely right that that's a very, very fundamental area of focus from a communications point of view.
I think sometimes gender equations get changed pretty unintentionally. So this is, I want to quote an example in water actually, not sanitation. So we are working with a community water purification enterprise. And they work through franchisees in peri-urban, urban, as well as rural areas. And I was doing these field visits, and I was in a highly patriarchal state. And I just stopped at a community water purification unit and was there for a few hours. And I kept observing who came to collect waters in those cans. And I kid you not, I probably saw about 100 people, and they were all men. Right? And I thought, oh, wow, this is interesting, that this gender balance is completely being shifted, unintentionally, probably, but it's all men. And then I started chatting with them, and I said, so why do you come here? Don't you have water at home? And, they all had water at home, but they were convinced this is better quality. And they said they came every day. And so suddenly a role which was always done by a woman was being done by a man. So maybe the trick is also to find how to shift that, and then it happens much faster. Yeah.
I also have an interesting story from a small town in Andhra Pradesh where there was a family of manual scavengers. They then bought one truck and started doing desludging. And as part of that work, they were also, because they were earlier manual scavengers, etc., they probably had a lot of exposure to alcohol. So the men became alcoholics and stopped doing this business. And the woman of the family then stepped in to take over the business. Today she has 6 trucks. Her son-in-law also stopped working, so the daughter also got into the business with her. And now we hear, because she's made it into such a successful business, that her other brothers and cousins and everyone want to take over her business and say, oh, it's fine, now you've set it up, now we can take it over because now it's a man's job to do this, right? So it's quite interesting that she took up the business. She made it really successful. From 1 truck, she's now doing 6. She's very powerful. She actually trained herself to be a mechanic as well. So very interesting story. And now what we're hearing from our partners is that the men in the family have now suddenly seen this is a very lucrative business and want to get back in. So it's about 2 things, about shifting gender norms, but also about professionalizing the service. So we have to know that there is a huge business opportunity in it. And if we can train the women to be entrepreneurs in this, we raise that level much higher. So she takes great pride in the work that she does. And she said, look at the journey that I've been on. And there's a video, I think my partners at Dasra can circulate it if people want. But she's very inspiring. And so that's kind of the inspiring story that keeps us very optimistic, that we need to invest in that kind of journey, both from the manual scavenging to professional sanitation workers, because the work is going to continue. We need them. We need to take away this social stigma. And at the same time, we need to encourage women's agency in all of this. So they're not just the recipients, but they're actually the agents of change in society.
I think just to come in on design, again, picking up on some of the stories, because we've talked about the type of business, a man's business, it's a woman's business, but that's where innovation can come in. We can make it different as well, and we can design for something new. And I think in sanitation, we've also found that new technologies are often left out of this sector for some reason. And I think there's a lot we can do with new technologies, and I'm talking some of the new digital technologies as well as technologies for FSM, et cetera. And so I think that, with robotics, there's lots of things coming down the pipe, we could see that shift, and we could see that it becomes very attractive because it's technical and cool and people want to get involved rather than a dirty business.
I just, want to add that I've been fortunate to see a lot of the work that SEVA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, does. And these women, contrary to perception, aren't just doing embroidery. They started off with doing embroidery. But these women are today organized into groups that are masons, they repair cycles, they repair solar lanterns. They can be taught to do anything. But the secret sauce, to my mind, is that you can't do it one woman in a village at a time. That there has to be a critical mass where they stand by each other so they don't get beaten up by their drunken husbands, and that they then represent the change in the community, and it changes so fast. So I don't despair at all, but where maybe we fail, whether as NGOs or organizers or donors, is to give them the tools initially, because they can't do it one at a time, but to provide the community input. And that's where finance becomes so key. When you finance self-help groups, you finance livelihood creation, you do it in a mass or group that it becomes a part of the village rather than one agent of change or one woman at a time.
And financing is not just helpful, for the product, but it improves the economic condition and hence leads to empowerment and better gender balance. Yeah, absolutely.
And just to pick up on what you just said, Naina, there's a lovely story that's in one of the films that we produced for the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation about a village in Himachal Pradesh where there was a lot of work done by the district administration initially around open defecation, and the women's groups in the village came together and they drove a lot of the sanitation behavior. But what was a really interesting byproduct outcome in that village wasn't so much about the sanitation status. It was the fact that these women had come together, had seen that their collective empowerment created real change in their village, and they took that into a whole range of new areas. So they took that into recycling and created new business opportunities for themselves by recycling. But then more importantly, they actually took on the alcoholism among the men in that village that was rampant and basically put an absolute stop to it. They beat them up almost. But they took that into their own hands and said, this is it. This is not going to happen any longer. But it was the women who saw the power of collective. And they sort of took that forward on their own. So it really needs that small initial impetus to see massive change.
Just to add, if you think of the way communication has changed, that a movie like Toilet If Prem Katha can actually happen and be a winner, a woman protagonist, the theme, and there's change in the air, and we absolutely need to capitalize on it. So I think we should end this discussion on a ray of hope that at the end of the day, there is huge change out there, that even a Bollywood movie can be a success on these issues, let alone the dangles in all of the world, which have, in any case, showcased how women in communities are changing the way communities think about them. And really look to push this, whether through money, entrepreneurship, and redefinition of their roles.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, but there's
Yeah.
one lady there who's been wanting to ask a question, so if you can quickly address her query.
Thank you. So my question is to Ms. Madhu Krishna, and this is regarding menstrual hygiene management. And so my question is that what is the impact we want to create, and what are the success indicators to validate that impact for various MHM programs, considering their own rise? For example, that one MHM program may promote sanitary napkin, and they, in most of the cases, whenever the sanitary napkin is promoted, they show a demonstration that if you use a cloth and they show ink and water and put it on that, and then it sort of promotes that cloth is not a good absorbent, therefore it's not the best thing to use. And many NGOs are working, like Goonj and other, who are really promoting cloth, and maybe they go to the same beneficiary. So is it not confusing the beneficiaries at the end of it, that whether to use a sanitary napkin or a cloth? So my question again is that what is the impact that we look at in this sector, and what is the success indicator for us to validate the impact?
So I think it's a two-pronged issue. Access is a big issue right now. We have very few girls and women who have access to safe sanitation products for MHM. So 12% or 14%, some really dismal figure. So I think that's the biggest issue right now. So we do have a responsibility to make access, to get access to these, to the women who don't have it. What is the choice of product? I think we do need to be mindful that we don't create a huge problem and we look back and say, oh, we did all of this, but we did it mindlessly, just like the use of plastic. So we do have to be mindful about what kind of products are we promoting. So I think it is something that we need to be careful about. So that definitely need to focus on access, and I think that onus is on both the multinationals, national companies, etc., to make that access happen, to the government to have the enabling policies. For instance, I think this huge tax on MHM products is something that the government needs to re-examine really, really carefully. But at the same time, let's do it mindfully so that we're not faced with mounds of waste that we can't then deal with. So that's the impact. So success would be if we have good products, but make sure that we get access, equitable access at affordable prices to those who need it the most. And there are states in India. Tamil Nadu went from some 40% coverage to 90% coverage in the last 5 years. So government does have a role to play, but the private sector has a bigger role to play in making sure that you get affordable products. If you can get toothpaste, why can't you get MHM products to the people who need them? People are willing to pay.
Are they only success?
Because it's a woman.
The success indicators are only the access, you mean, and
access with good products.
Good products.
Yeah, good
and also
products
about the
that
cultural taboos and like the whole.
I think, yeah. I mean, of course, that's a big problem. But first we have to do with the main access problem. The taboos will come alongside that. The much more open conversation, and I see that that's happening. That in big fora, people are talking about menstrual hygiene. Hopefully, the ads will go away from the kind of shyness that we have about it. Let's be pretty open. But to Nana's point, there is a movie called Padman, and people are seeing it. And there is a male actor who's showing you the value of having a good MH product. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. Since Dawn Foundation is working with more than 1 million poor households, especially these women self-help groups across the country, a few observations as well as some challenges, just I want to throw it out. One is we seen this sanitation is one of the indicator for a women empowerment. That's the first point, just I want to make it here. The second thing is out of 2 lakhs toilets constructed in the last 2 years, around 1.85 lakhs of toilets constructed by women only. That means under women self-help groups. Remaining only 15,000 only is come from these men self-help groups. It's our experience. The third thing is around 20% of the toilets are constructed due to the influence of the girls, that's the daughters of the particular family. So that is the another point. That is our experience. The usage percentages comes around nearly 96% among women, around only 81% by men. That is another significant the women part in sanitation. And And but there are some constraints also. This one constraint is like the women has less awareness, let's say like a poor awareness when compared to men. But they have a flexibility, but the women has a high flexibility to change their behavior and practice. That is a very, very important positive area we could able to observe. And the second thing is we need, at present actually, we need some sort of the leadership for change among the women. That means the leadership quality is very, very important for the women to represent in the many forums like a panchayat or the block level forums. That kind of the leadership quality is very, very important. As our friend is mentioned about this, capacity building is very, very important at present, because now the self-help groups is providing a stage to the women, especially on this. On a self-help group forum, they are participating very well. There is a very huge space is available. But in terms of having this panchayat level, or it's a block level, or it's a district level, that space is still, it has not been created much. That space to be created, then only we can able to achieve the level of this ODF plus or ODF sustainability that could be easily we can be able to reach out. That is the thing just I want to throw it out. For that actually we need to think about it.
Thank you so much. I completely agree with you. Leadership and representation at every level. And also to take up from the point that he made, that often you see that it's the daughters who are convincing, you know, the men in the family to bring about the toilets. And the point that many of you raised, that it's the men who don't see a, you know, much point into having a toilet, and when there is access, they don't even use it then. How do we fix that? So maybe, you know, somebody from the audience, some men from the audience would want to tell us, how do we get that messaging right? Apart from maybe a hashtag don't pee on the road, but what else can, you know, how do we fix that? Would anybody want to share your thoughts?
It's very simple, ma. It's the daughters. Who can convince a father can convert a father. Simple. Okay. Get the daughters right, you get the fathers right. Who don't have a daughter, look for a daughter.
Can I ask one more question? I know we are out of time.
Where are we?
Here.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so this is not directly about women, but it's about gender. Do you think, given that sanitation is such a fundamental human need, do you think there's a need to, and is the time right to go beyond the man-woman binary in gender and talk about other ways in which women people define themselves? And what could that look like? What could the low-hanging fruit down that path look like?
Well, it's a little bit more than communication, but I'm nodding vigorously.
I'm talking about the third and the fourth and the fifth gender, not men and women.
Absolutely. No, I was nodding vigorously because I completely agree with you. We talk so much about binary genders, and we completely ignore a lot of the conversation around the fact that it isn't just binary genders. And even, you know, if things are difficult for women, it is that much more difficult for people who don't fall into a binary gender role. I think the challenge, and I'm speaking from a communication perspective, I think the challenge there is that it's so much broader than just sanitation. And I think if we look at it through a sanitation lens from a communication perspective, I think we only tell a very small sliver of the story. And I think it needs to be much larger. And I think communication alone can do very little when we're dealing with a country where you've got Section 377, you've got a whole bunch of structural issues that stand in the way. So I think it's got to be a much larger conversation when we're talking about non-binary gender inclusion in sanitation outcomes. But it's a conversation that perhaps deserves its own entire panel.
You wanted to say something?
Yeah. I would just like to request the chair, India Sanitation Coalition, that during this session on Women for Sanitation, can we come up with a strong resolution to the Government of India that the GST on sanitary pads be removed, and on vending machines and incinerators, it's been increased from 12% to 18%. So the cost of the machines has gone up. And if the government would be ready to take this resolution from this session of the India Sanitation Coalition, I think that would be a big achievement on our part.
There is no representation of women on the GST Council, but perhaps we can raise the pitch and get the message across, Ms. Kidwai?
Actually, it's 18% on any sanitation product. Anything, be it a pan or anything, it's
Because
it's
on one
18%
hand, the
tax.
government is talking of providing free sanitary napkins to children in government schools.
Yes.
And on the other hand, they have imposed GST and made pads more expensive, as well as the vending machines and the incinerators. I'm saying this because we are supplying machines to schools and installing it in schools and colleges.
So yeah, it's a good point. The point has been made, it has to continue to be made, and the battle will.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you so much for everybody for staying on for the last session. I am in complete awe of the ladies who are here, and it's been a great learning experience. Thank you so much. And I think a lot more has to be done. 2019 may be a target figure for the government in terms of statistics, but the larger change and the cultural mindset change is going to be a long, long battle. So let's keep at it. Thank you so much. Thank you.